You know, grief is something we all face, right? It's this incredibly profound, sometimes really painful part of being human. But what if there's more to it than just what we feel on the surface? Today, we're going to explore a really unique spiritual take on grief, looking at its unseen side and how it affects not just us, the living, but the departed too. All right, let's get into it. So we tend to think of grief as, well, our experience, something that only affects those of us who are left behind. But this perspective kicks things off with a fascinating question. Is grief really a one-way street? The idea here is that the experience of loss is actually felt on both sides of that divide, creating a connection that works in ways you might not expect.
So, to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. First up, we'll look at the 2 sides of grief. Then we'll dive into the unseen environment it apparently creates. After that, we'll explore an earthbound struggle, figure out the key difference between grieving and missing, and finally, talk about the power of letting go.
All right, so let's jump right in with the big idea here. Grief isn't just something that happens to the person left here on Earth. It's presented as this shared emotional state that actually bridges the gap between our world and whatever comes next.
Now, this is the part of grief we're all familiar with, unfortunately. It can be totally all-consuming, right? It can feel like it's impossible to move on, to find any joy at all. And the source material absolutely acknowledges this deep, immobilizing power that grief can have over someone's life.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting, the first big twist in this perspective. The idea is that the departed also feel a kind of grief for the loved ones they've left behind, and this feeling can be so intense that it actually makes it harder for them to get used to their new reality.
Okay, so if we accept that grief is this shared thing, how does that even work? What are the mechanics? Well, that brings us to this concept of an unseen environment and the very real spiritual impact that our sorrow can have.
What's fascinating here is the specific way they describe this. According to this viewpoint, that powerful emotion of grief doesn't just stay locked inside of you. It's like it radiates outward, creating what's called a gloomy, ethereal environment, almost like a spiritual weather system of pure sorrow that surrounds you.
And, this gloomy atmosphere doesn't just hang there in a vacuum. The thinking is that like attracts like. So this environment becomes a magnet for what the source calls negative thought forms and other discarnate spirits that are drawn to that same heavy, low-vibration energy.
But, and this is a really crucial point, it's not like these entities are just passive bystanders. The idea is that they actively amplify the sorrow of the person grieving. They essentially feed on that emotional energy, which means it's in their best interest to keep that person stuck in their grief.
So what you get is this really awful feedback loop. What started as natural grief can get supercharged into something much worse, prolonged emotional distress, intense feelings of rebellion or injustice, even causing irrational behavior, and it can take a serious toll on your physical health too.
So we've talked about the person grieving, but what about the spirit of the person who's passed away? What does all this mean for them? This is where we shift our focus and see how this earthly grief can literally create a tether.
The core idea here is something called a strong emotional binding tie. The intense, long-lasting grief from loved ones is basically described as an anchor. It's a kind of spiritual tether that keeps the departed spirit from fully moving on, keeping them close to the earth plane.
And this can lead to a really tragic struggle for that spirit. They're being held back by the sadness of the people they love most. They might be trying desperately to communicate, "Hey, I'm okay," but they just can't get through. This leaves them vulnerable to those same negative forces we just mentioned, and ultimately, they can become stuck or earthbound.
Okay, I know this all sounds really heavy, maybe even a little scary. But the source doesn't just leave us there. It offers a way through, a crucial pivot in how we look at this. And it all comes down to the huge difference between grieving for someone and simply missing them.
Just take a look at the difference here. It's night and day. On one side, you've got grieving. That's the gloom, the darkness, that binding tie that keeps a spirit stuck. But then you flip it, and you have missing. This is all about joyful memories, light, letting go, and freedom for everyone involved. The effects are polar opposites. So, what's the big difference? Why is missing so much better than grieving? Well, it all comes down to the energy behind it. When you miss someone, you're usually thinking about the good times, right? The laughter, the happy memories. According to this view, those emotions create a light, positive environment instead of a gloomy, heavy one.
And that brings us to our final piece of the puzzle, the real power of letting go. By making that shift from grieving to missing, we unlock a much healthier, more hopeful way to stay connected.
So just like that gloom attracted negative stuff, this lighter environment of joyful remembrance, it does the exact opposite. It's said to attract beautiful positive energies. And these energies then help both the person on earth and the departed spirit to find peace and let go of sorrow, creating this amazing, healing, upward spiral.
To make this crystal clear, the Source gives us this really simple but powerful analogy. It says we should miss a departed one just as a mother misses a child who's gone off to college. I mean, of course there's sadness because they're not there, but it's completely overshadowed by the love, the pride, and the excitement for their new journey. And really, that's the core of it all. The goal is never to forget the person or erase the love. It's about transforming the pain of their absence into the hope of a future joyful reunion. It's about letting them go on their journey, which in turn sets us free too.
So, in the end, this whole perspective kind of leaves us with one big, profound question to think about, one that could reframe everything we think about loss. If we really believe that life is a journey, then maybe death isn't the end of the road. Maybe it's just the next destination.